We spend a lot of time learning, understanding ideas, concepts, frameworks. But there's a gap that most people never cross. The gap between understanding something and actually living it. In the language of Torah, that gap is the difference between Binah and Daas. Binah is when something makes sense. Daas is when what you understand and how you actually live are aligned. When what you know becomes the way you experience and respond to reality. This series is about closing that gap. Taking ideas that we understand intellectually and turning them into something real, something lived, something that shapes how we see everything that happens in our lives. We'll be working with Torah teachings that approach this with precision and structure. Not just what to believe, but how reality actually works and how to operate within it correctly. So this is not a series about inspiration. It's a series about process, a structured path from Binah to Daas. Welcome back, my friends, to another episode of the Shema podcast, another installment in our series from Binah to Daas. Several episodes ago, in one titled Exposing the Illusion of the System, we explored an idea from Baal HaSulam that has really stayed with me. The idea that I don't control outcomes, but at the same time, I'm required to fully engage in effort. And this week I went back into an essay by the Baal HaSulam called Disclosing a Portion Covering Two. An essay where he explains why truth is often concealed and why even when we understand something clearly, it doesn't necessarily become part of how we experience reality. Because if you ever had the experience where something makes perfect sense, but doesn't actually change how you think, how you feel, how you respond, this essay explains why. So this is really getting to the heart and providing a detailed roadmap of this very idea that we are trying to tackle with this series ongoing from Binah to Daas. And I want to start today by being very honest about where I am with this idea we had discussed before and how it's actually flowing through this framework. So I've been living inside it all week, not just thinking about it, not just understanding it, living inside the tension of this paradox that we don't control any outcomes, yet we are required to engage fully in the system. And there are moments where it feels real, where I can focus on what's in front of me, take action, and feel grounded, even without knowing how things will turn out. And then there are other moments where my mind jumps ahead, the pressure builds, and it feels like everything depends on me again. And it feels like everything depends on me once again. So I've been oscillating between clarity and fear, between presence and projection, between what I know and what I experience. And what's been bothering me is this. I understand the idea, but I'm not yet fully living it. And that question, why that gap exists, led me to this essay. And what Baal HaSulam shows there is something very precise. He says, I reveal one portion and conceal two. And then he adds, a work is a rock, silence is two. Very esoteric sounding until you begin to unravel what he is getting at. Because at first it just sounds something that's poetic. But what he's actually saying is very unsettling. We assume that if something is true, we should say it, explain it, teach it, share it, do a podcast on it. But he's saying something very different. He's saying that sometimes saying something can actually distort it, and that not everything that is true should be revealed, not because it's hidden, but because it can't be received properly. And then he introduces a framework. He says that all wisdom passes through 3 gates before it can be revealed. The first gate is called the unnecessary. The second gate is called the impossible. And the third is only for one who fears Hashem. So I want to walk through these gates, not just as ideas, but through the lens of what I've been experiencing in real time, trying to internalize the previous lesson that we covered in the episode, Exposing the Illusion of the System. As I've been learning this, I started to realize something else. This isn't just a framework for understanding Torah, it's also a very precise map of how the yetzer hara operates, not by blocking truth, but by shaping how we receive it. So let's start with the first gate that he calls the unnecessary. Baal HaSulam says there are things that are completely true, but revealing them produces no benefit. And that's a very strong statement because we assume that truth is always beneficial. But he's using the word benefit very precisely. He doesn't mean something is interesting or inspiring. He means, does it actually change the person? Does it enter their life? Does it affect how they think, how they respond, how they act? If not, then in his language, it has no benefit. So he's not only teaching us how we go about conveying information, but he's obviously teaching us how we receive information. To receive information and have it only impact us as, wow, that was fascinating and so interesting, that has no benefit to us whatsoever. Because again, we're just getting to Binah, and the idea of Torah is to get it into Daas. The same goes when we're communicating to other people. If it just lands and will only stay in Binah, then he's saying it has no benefit, so don't say anything. That's why he says in the beginning, I reveal one portion and conceal 2. And he explains the line, a word is a rock, but silence is 2. And he's getting at the harm of delivering information that just remains in the other's Binah and of receiving the information. And we're talking about Torah ideas here that we just allow to reside in Binah and not flow through to Daas. He goes on to describe a type of person who hears an idea and responds internally with something like, so what? It took me a while to understand what he was getting at here. He doesn't mean that someone's saying out loud, so what? And it doesn't mean they reject the idea. That is key. I'm going to repeat that. It does not mean that someone's rejecting the idea. As we'll see, it's just the opposite. It's much more subtle. So what is not about what's being said. It's about what someone's system does with the idea, with the Torah idea they just heard. If the idea does not create tension, interrupt behavior, challenge how one sees things, then the system, someone's system, has it categorized as non-actionable. And that is the same as saying, so what? You see, the yetzer hara doesn't need you to reject truth. It only needs to make sure it feels like it costs too much. Let's explain what that means. This means you can understand something, agree with it, even be inspired by it, and still have it do absolutely nothing in your life. And this is where Baal HaSulam becomes very strong, because this state creates a very dangerous illusion. You feel like you're engaged with truth, but nothing is changing. So over time, something subtle happens. You become more knowledgeable, have greater understanding, greater Binah, and that allows you to become more articulate, more confident, but not more aligned. Alignment only comes through Daas. And this is the part that's uncomfortable to admit. A so what person can be learning regularly, thinking deeply, even teaching others, and still be in this exact state. As you can tell, as I read this essay, I was seeing myself. It was like he was literally talking directly to me. Because the issue is not exposure to ideas. It's what happens when the ideas actually arrive. What happens underneath all this is something very important. Your system is not just asking, is this true? The mind's saying that's true. If you're listening to this podcast, you're not someone who hears a Torah idea and says, I don't believe that to be true. The mind says that's true, but something deeper asks, but at what cost? Because if an idea were to fully enter someone's life, it might require they let go of control, admit they were wrong, changing how they act, and then tolerating uncertainty. All those things take place when we incorporate a Torah idea from Binah to Daas, and the cost feels too high. So your mind doesn't reject the idea. This is how clever the yetzer is. It manages the idea. So what does that mean? It means the mind is preserving the person's current identity, the current way of seeing the world, emotional stability, the sense of control. Any idea that threatens those things is not processed neutrally. It's filtered. So instead of rejecting the idea, the system does something more subtle. It allows the person to understand it without letting it touch anything that would require change. This is what you might call absorption without transformation. As long as nothing changes, the yetzer hara is perfectly comfortable with how much someone learns. I'm going to repeat that again. As long as nothing changes, as long as that Torah does not become Daas, the yetzer hara is perfectly comfortable with how much someone learns at the level of Binah. The idea is taken in, but nothing in the person actually changes. That's why this teaching is so important, my friends, because he breaks down exactly what the yetzer hara does in order to stop us from changing from the information and allowing the Torah we learn to transform us. And this is the whole real meaning of when he says, so what? Torah that is Binah, that we're not working to bring into Daas, is so what? Hence the purpose of this entire series, to help us with this, what seems like the hardest part of the journey. But thankfully, we have these amazing teachings to guide us through this process. So now let's bring this idea that we've been discussing about controlling outcomes. What I did several episodes ago, again, on the illusion of the system, something I've been working to incorporate into Daas. Holding these two ideas that I don't control outcomes. I mean, I believe that. I understand it. But when I step into a situation where something matters, my nervous system, my body, is still reacting as if I do, which means that part of me has received the idea and part of me has quietly categorized it as non-actionable. So what? And Baal HaSulam is saying something very sharp here. A truth becomes unnecessary the moment it stops asking anything of you. But now it sits in your mind as something you have while your life remains the same. And he's saying that's even more dangerous than just rejecting the idea outright. Because when you reject the idea, it keeps the issue open. But when you get to this idea of so what, this mentality of, okay, I understand it now, but I'm not going to do anything with it, it closes it in your mind and you move on to the next item. Now the second gate, the impossible, is what he calls it. Baal HaSulam says there are things that are impossible to reveal. Not difficult, not advanced, impossible. And he adds that revealing these matters requires permission from above. At first, that sounded mystical. Once again, but if you look closely, he's describing something very real that we can relate to, and something we've actually discussed before. He's saying that certain truths are not ideas. They are ways of seeing reality. And that means something very important. I don't actually have the reality. I have a concept of that reality, and those are not the same thing. Because if something is a way of seeing reality, you cannot transfer it through words. This will make more sense. You can explain an idea, but you cannot transfer perception. If you think you already have it, you'll never put yourself in the position to actually gain it. And that's exactly where the yetzer hara wants you. And that means something very important. Reality is not changed by explanation. It's not changed by listening to a podcast or even reading a text. Nobody can transfer perception to you. It is only changed through experience. And this is exactly what I'm experiencing. I can say clearly I don't control outcomes, and I mean it, but then I step into a real situation and my body reacts as if I do, because my understanding is there, but my perception hasn't caught up yet. And this is where Baal HaSulam points to something fascinating. He brings in the Zohar. The Zohar, attributed to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, is one of the foundational works of Kabbalah. If you're not familiar with this text, it's not written like a book of ideas. It reads like a journey. You have Rabbi Shimon and a group of sages walking together, traveling, encountering situations, and speaking Torah through these encounters. So that the teaching in the Zohar is always embedded in their experience. And that's not just a stylistic choice, it's a necessity. It's getting to the heart of what the Baal HaSulam is talking about. Because the kind of truths we're talking about cannot be reduced into definitions without losing something essential. So instead of trying to explain them directly, the Zohar creates a path. It places you inside a process where you can arrive at the truth. That's why the Zohar doesn't tell you what to think. It walks you through what it means to see. And it's not a coincidence that we're approaching Lag BaOmer, the day associated with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai yahrzeit. A day often described as a day of light and revelation, but now we can understand that more precisely. It's not just that more ideas were revealed, it's that a deeper level of reality became accessible. And that is what Baal HaSulam means when he says these matters require permission from above. Even if the words are spoken, the truth will only land if the person hearing it is in a state that can receive it. Otherwise, they don't receive the reality. They receive a concept. And this connects directly to something else I've been experiencing. Your mind learns through understanding, but your body learns through experience. And more specifically, your system learns through repeated experiences where what you feared does not collapse. Not that everything is fine, but that it was survivable. And over time, that begins to change how you see reality. And this is important to understand. There's a difference between tension that builds you and tension that overwhelms you. When you are focused on what's in front of you, acting in the present moment, even with uncertainty, that's productive tension. But when your mind jumps into the future and tries to solve everything at once, that's overload. And your system reacts as if everything is happening right now. That's where the anxiety spikes. Not because something is wrong, but because you're carrying more than this moment requires. And this is why this process can feel so intense, because you're living inside that tension. And just to make this real, you already know this from other areas of life. You can't explain confidence to someone who has never acted under pressure. You can't explain calm to someone who has never been in a situation where they had to hold it. They can only understand it after they lived it. Eventually, by me pushing through this idea and experiencing, living with this paradox of not controlling any outcomes, but engaging full throttle into the system every day, eventually through that action. And if you remember from that many episodes we've done that we've addressed, the path to Binah to Daas takes action. Through that action, through that experience, eventually I will gain Daas in this matter. However, what I realized is that I'll never be able to convey that to someone over a podcast or via words. All I can do is show someone the roadmap to get there themselves, because it's not something that you get conceptually in your mind. You're not going to get Daas by listening to a podcast. That is stage one, getting Binah. But you're never going to get to the Daas by listening to a podcast and saying, wow, what a great idea, and then going on to the next thing, right? It's not going to happen. Eventually, you have to take the Binah and you have to engage in action in the system and learn to live with these ideas. And then once you have as Daas, you will not be able to convey it to someone else. Everyone has to go through the action, gain the experience. This brings us back to another example we've discussed early on. It wasn't part of this series. It was sort of the predecessor to this series called The Structured Path to Dveikus. And these ideas we'll be coming back to over and over again because they all tie back to the story of redemption in the Torah. So let's take this idea, this second gate, and bring it back to the story in the Torah we know so well. The Jewish people had already seen everything. A year of watching all the miracles, the power, They had clarity. They had understanding. They had Binah. But when they stood at the sea, they were afraid because their understanding had not yet become their perception. Moshe Rabbeinu could not explain to them Daas. So what happened? They had to move. Nachshon walked into the water, not because he felt no fear, but because he acted before his perception changed. And back to that previous episode on the structured path to Dvekus, we talked about what people do instead. Instead of taking the action, even when there's fear, they use their imagination, their intelligence, and they try to create certainty in the present. They try to replace bitachon, replace emunah, but that's not the path, obviously, and it's not the goal. So it was only after that, after Nachshon, followed by everyone else, through his leadership really, but because he acted before his perception changed, while he felt fear, and only after that, only then did they see differently. Only then did they know. That's Daas. At the edge of real change, the yetzer doesn't argue. It amplifies fear. And something else I'm realizing through this process, you can't force this. You can't push yourself into Daas. You can only act, stay aware, and allow the process to unfold. And instead of seeing the gap as failure, I'm starting to see it as a process. And this is important to say clearly. The gap is not a flaw. It's not that something is wrong with you. It's that you are seeing something most people don't even notice. The difference between understanding something and actually living it. Now the third gate, where he says it's only for one who fears Hashem. And this does not mean fear in the emotional sense. It means something much deeper. It means that a person is more committed to truth than they are to protecting themselves. I'm going to say that again because the fear of Hashem, this idea can become distorted. What we're talking about here is that a person becomes more committed to truth than protecting the status quo. Because even when you understand something, and even when you've lived through experiences that should move into deeper, there is still one final barrier. The part of you that doesn't want to let go. And so instead of rejecting the idea, you adjust it. Anyone listening to this episode, anyone listening to this podcast, is at a point to where the yetzer is not going to have any success with you telling you to ignore the truth. Okay, you're past that at this point. The next stage is it teaches you how to bend it. And the adjustment is very subtle. You don't throw away the idea. You keep it, but you reshape it just enough so that you don't have to fully change. Yes, I don't control the outcomes, but in this situation, I really need to make sure this works. That's gate 3. At the highest level, the yetzer isn't trying to stop you from learning. It's trying to stop you from becoming. Not ignorance, not confusion, but protecting yourself from the full implication of the truth. And here's something important. From Baal HaSulam's perspective, these 3 gates are not steps. They are conditions. But from our experience, it often feels like gate 3 comes first. Because without a commitment to truth, we won't step into the situations that lead to Daas. So there are 2 things happening at once, the structure of revelation and the experience of growth. And when you step back, you can see how all 3 gates are working together. Gate 1 protects you from ideas that won't change you. Gate 2 shows you that some things can't be learned through ideas at all. And gate 3 reveals the final barrier, that even when truth is clear, you still have to be willing to let it change you. So where does that leave me? It leaves me here. I understand the idea. I'm living through situations that challenge it. And I'm starting to see the parts of me that still resist it. And I don't yet fully have it, but I now understand something I didn't before. And that is when I do, as I said before, I know I won't be able to fully explain it to someone else. And that's not a limitation. That's the point. Because some truths are not learned by hearing them. They're learned by walking into them. There are things you can learn, and there are things you can only become. And Torah is not teaching us what to think. It's guiding us through the process of becoming. That's it for today. And if you're feeling that gap between what you understand and what you live, you're not behind. You're exactly where this process happens.
Thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed the episode and found it meaningful, please take a moment to rate, review, and share the podcast.